friend and I were taking a walk down by the river, where there was a trail people would use for bike riding and running. It was a hot day, and it was towards the end of the day, so the sun was setting. The sky was turning a reddish orange. The river was sparkling from the sunlight. We were talking and laughing about something as we walked down this trail. Then I noticed someone up ahead of us. I pointed him out to my friend, and we both just noticed this person standing still by the water. He had his back to us, and he was facing the water. I could tell he was a guy, probably 20 to 30 years old. My friend and I got quiet for some reason, not because we were creeped out, but I think just because we didn't want him hearing us. We got closer and closer to him, and I could hear that he was talking to himself. My friend made a joke about him being crazy, but I told her to shut up because it was actually really weird how he was just standing there. We were about to walk right past him. We stopped and stood in place because we were scared to walk past him. Then he just slowly started walking forward into the water, while still muttering to himself. My friend and I looked at each other, and I said to her, "He's not stopping." He walked further into the water until the water was up to his hips. Then he stopped and stood there. He just stood there and stopped talking, now looking into the sky. I whispered to my friend, "Is he going to drown himself?" My friend said, "We should call the cops." Then the guy turned around suddenly and started walking back to the shore. We got scared and started walking away, and I heard him running up the embankment. I looked back, and he was gone. We sped up and quickly got off the trail, and we never saw that guy again. This was something that happened so long ago that a lot of details are a little blurry. It's not like it happened yesterday. I'll try my best to fill in smaller details that I don't fully remember with how I best remember things played out. It was the last day of school, and I was in the 4th grade. 4th grade was the last year in our elementary school where kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My mom would always be the one to pick me up on the last day of school. My friend Dennis and I had a playdate planned to celebrate the last day of school. Dennis wasn't in my class this year, but we had been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway from me. After school was over, we single file lined up and walked to the exit door at the end of the hall where we waited outside by our teacher, Miss Blue. I waited for Dennis's dad to appear from the crowd of parents shuffling in and out of the parking lot next to the doors. Then I heard my name, "Tommy, Tommy." I look over and see a man waving at me as he approached. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was picking me up. I went over to Miss Blue and said, "I'm being picked up." She asked, "Where is he, sweetie?" And I pointed to Dennis's uncle, who waved at Miss Blue. Miss Blue dismissed me, and I went with the man. He led us through the crowd and was a very quick and jittery talker, like he spoke fast and had a bit of a stutter. He was walking incredibly fast. It was almost hard to keep up with him with my backpack on. He explained to me that his brother, or Dennis's dad, was working later than expected, so he was driving me back. We got to his car, which was a dark red hatchback type car from what I remember, and it took me this long to acknowledge the giant elephant in the room. Where was Dennis? Why weren't we picking him up too? The man turned to look at me in the back seat and said that Dennis was already at his house. I was shy around people I didn't know, especially adults, and I wasn't one to openly speak my mind if I was confused. But I was very confused. This was making less and less sense. The whole drive, the man kept yapping, telling stories of his days in elementary, asking me questions like what sports I played, what we were learning in class. If I had to guess, we were in the car for like 10 minutes, which honestly for our town, where houses were right on top of each other, that was a while. My house was a 5-minute walk away from the school. We were definitely in an area I wasn't familiar with. When he parked the car in front of his house looked pretty normal to me from what I remember. He led us inside and shut the door and locked it behind us. It was really, really dark inside the place, and I realized why. All the curtains were shut. It almost felt like it was nighttime in there, especially because the only source of light was a dim lamp in the corner of the room. He then looked at me and smiled. I said, "Where's Dennis?" And he started acting really jittery and nervous seeming. He said something like, "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games. Give me a second. Wait here." He then disappeared into a nearby room. and I heard a door open and then footsteps descending into a basement. I know my heart was already racing. I knew I was in danger. I went to the door to quietly try to open it, but I couldn't. It had some kind of lock that must have needed a key for it. I really started to panic now, yet I still probably held out a little bit of hope that Dennis would be coming up those stairs. But I knew the chances of that were slim. I regretted entering that house. I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the kitchen and found a phone hung on the wall. I picked it off the receiver and dialed 911. The first thing I said when they answered was in a whisper, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." They heard me, they acknowledged me, but I didn't say another word. I hid the phone under a towel in the corner of the room with 911 still on the line. I hurried back to where the man left me as I already heard his footsteps coming back upstairs. Then he called my name, saying, "Come down. Dennis is down here." Then there was a pause. He repeated my name, and when I didn't answer, he came up the stairs fully to look at me. He asked me if I was okay. I felt so sick, and I was so scared. I hated myself for walking into the situation and not being wiser. I asked in a very scared voice if I could leave, and I remember the change in his face. His fake friendly smile disappeared as he realized that I was no longer falling for this. He walked closer to me in a gentle manner until he was close enough to grab my wrist aggressively, and he started pulling me towards the basement. I screamed and cried, and he screamed at me, "I'll let you go if you stop and behave." So I listened. I went down the stairs, and halfway down, the door slammed shut behind me, and I heard it lock. I walked fully down the stairs to this empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one singular support beam in the middle of the room. There was a depressing yellow glow in the room from one exposed light bulb hanging on the ceiling. If there was a place you'd imagine kidnapped children to go, this would be it. I heard his heavy footsteps upstairs. You could hear everything in this house. I don't know what he was doing, but I heard him walking around for a while. Then he came to the basement door, opened it, and he called down asking if I'm hungry. I replied, no, I didn't want him going into the kitchen, seeing the missing phone. He shut the door and locked it again. I sat down there waiting with my heart in my throat, and then I heard it. The doorbell ringing 3 times from upstairs, followed by banging sounds, which were definitely the sounds of police banging on the door. I refrained from screaming until I heard the front door open, but I never heard the man's footsteps approach the door. The doorbell kept ringing, and I kept hearing the bangs. This went on for some time until I heard a really loud bang sound, and then multiple heavy footsteps and multiple screaming voices. I started screaming for help as loud as I could at the top of the stairs, banging on the door. The door was unlocked, and a police officer on the other side grabbed hold of me and hurried me outside. There were at least 3 cop cars outside. I had to tell everything to 2 of the cops outside as we waited for my parents to show up. The man from inside was brought outside and into a cop car in handcuffs, and that was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived on the scene, my mum was bawling her eyes out. There had already been a hole at the school as cops were called, and Dennis's dad realized what happened. This man was a work associate of Dennis's father. When he somehow learned that Dennis's dad would be picking up Dennis and I from school on the last day, he seized the opportunity to do what he did. A complete sick. I don't know how he found out what I looked like. As I got older, I never really asked for more details because I try not to think about it. My mom went to counseling with me for months after this incident. Let's just say my parents didn't have kind words for Miss Blue, not verifying if I actually knew the person picking me up. If I didn't think to call the police before he basically threw me in that basement, I know for a fact I'd be dead right now. This was like 17 years ago. That man might be out of prison for all I know. It was junior year of high school, and it was the last day of school. A lot of people cut school this day or left early after lunch period. My friends and I were some of the latter. It was a stormy, dark day. A bunch of people from our grade originally planned to hit the beach on the last day of school, but that was obviously cancelled. So my smaller core group of friends decided to do something else. There used to be an abandoned elementary school in town that hadn't been used for like 10 years. There were plans to tear it down by the year's end. Still wanting to do something fun on the last day of school, we all agreed to break into the building and just around exploring. There were no cameras in that old building, and on a stormy day, no one would be outside monitoring the place or anything. So we all left after lunch period. Our friend Eddie already had a car and his license, so he drove us all to the abandoned school. The school was in the middle of a neighborhood, not on any main roads or anything. There was a back parking lot covered by overgrown bushes and trees on one side, and the walls of the school on two other sides. It was a perfect spot to park and go unnoticed. The place wasn't boarded up or anything. It was just locked up. Eddie had a baseball bat in his trunk that he took out to smash one of the windows in the back. I would have been scared to hear it, but the heavy winds kind of masked the sound of it smashing. One by one, we climbed into the school, carefully stepping on the tiled floor littered with broken glass. It was dark and cold inside, even colder than outside. It was creepy as hell. You could hear the sound of the wind howling outside, but even louder inside. The halls echoed with each footstep. One of the girls with us, Amanda, was already getting cold feet. I saw her lagging behind, as in she wasn't entering the building at all. We convinced her to come in with us and started exploring the hallways. It was honestly really creepy in there. We went from the main lobby into some classroom corridors, stepping over random objects, dirt, rocks, and the occasional pencil or pen. Most of the lockers were closed, but there was the occasional one open with a backpack or jacket still inside. The place smelled moldy and dusty. There was a book left open on the floor in the middle of one of the classrooms, which was odd considering there was barely anything else in any of the rooms. It was getting dust all over it, but one of us picked it up and started reading it. I don't remember exactly what it was. It may have been some old science textbook. My friend Johnny went up to the chalkboard and started writing something with the chalk that was still there, but I told him to erase it as soon as he wrote it, just because I had this fear of leaving any sign that we were there. Even though it was just an old abandoned building, it was still illegal to trespass, and I didn't want to take any chances. He erased the chalk, and we stepped back into the hallway. As we got closer to the center of the school by the courtyard, we heard this really weird sound. It was a really quick, repetitive sound, like a tapping or knocking sound. It was echoing in the hallway and sounded kind of distant. It seemed like it was coming from straight ahead of us, like in a new section of the hallway we hadn't been to yet. We stopped for a second, listened, and looked down the hallway. Johnny whispered that he wanted to go check it out. Amanda started freaking out and told us we should leave, but we didn't listen to her. We continued down the hall towards the sound of the tapping. The closer we got to it, the louder it got, but it was still kind of a faint sound. When we were closer to the next section of the hallway, Eddie and I whispered that we'd go check it out, so we walked ahead of the group and peered around the corner. There was no one there, but the tapping was louder. We stepped fully into the hallway and approached a corner classroom. The door was shut. Eddie and I looked at each other, and I said, "Open it." So he did. He grabbed the knob and pushed open the door, but it only cracked open a little bit. We heard the creaking of the door's hinges, and the tapping became louder as it echoed down the halls. I remember feeling my throat drop into my chest. I didn't know why, but I was so scared. We pushed the door open the rest of the way, and were met with a dark, empty classroom. The tapping was the window latch being blown against the window frame. The window was open just a crack, which was apparently enough for the wind to blow the latch against it and make that sound. We all laughed and shut the door. We headed back down the hall towards the main lobby, and I saw Amanda go through the window to climb back outside. She was basically done, and the rest of us were feeling ready to call it quits. When I climbed through the window back outside, I remember hearing Johnny say, "SHH." I turned back to the window to listen, and the rest of the group was still in there listening. They said they heard something. I stayed quiet to listen too. There was this really, really weird noise. At first, it was distant, but as the others followed us out the window, it got louder. It almost sounded like a scream, but not an ordinary scream. It was kind of this high-pitched wailing sound. The girls started getting really creeped out. We all started hurrying to Eddie's car. When we were inside the car, about to back up, we realized the gates to the back parking lot had been shut. That wasn't like that before. We didn't know who shut them, but Eddie parked the car as close to the gates as possible, and we had to get out and try to push the gates open. As we were doing so, I looked back at the school, and I could swear I saw someone peeking at us from the corner of the school building. I was too focused on getting out of there to care about it. Eddie drove us all home, and we couldn't stop talking about what we heard. We all had different opinions of what it might have been. Some of us thought it was just the wind. Some thought it was some kind of old, broken-down power system. Either way, what I know for a fact is that those gates didn't close themselves, and the more I think back on it, the more I believe I did see someone peeking around the corner of that building at us as we were trying to get out.